Before we forget, I got to ask you about this paper.
Right.
Pretty interesting. There's an interesting table here about hard steps. Abiogenesis, glucose fermentation to pyruvic acid, all kinds of steps, all the way to Homo sapiens, animal intelligence, land ecosystems, endoskeletons, eye precursor, so formation of the eye.
Yeah.
Complex multicellularity.
That's definitely one of the big ones.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, what can you say about this chart? There are all kinds of papers talking about what the difficulty of these steps.
Right. And so this was the idea. So what Carter said was, using anthropic reasoning, he said there must be a few very hard steps for the evolution to get through to make it to intelligence. Right. So there's some steps are going to be easy. So every generation, you roll the dice and it won't take long for you to get that step. But there must be a few of them. And he said you could even calculate how many there were, 5, 6, in order to get to intelligence. And so this paper here, this plot, is all these different people who've written all these papers. And this is the point, actually. You can see all these papers that were written on the hard steps, each one proposing a different set of what those steps should be. And there's this other idea from biology of the major transitions in evolution, MTEs, that those were the hard steps. But what we actually found was that none of those are actually hard. The whole idea of hard steps, that there are hard steps, is actually suspect. So, what's amazing about this model is it shows how important it is to actually work with people who are in the field, right? Mm-hmm. So, Brandon Carter was a brilliant physicist, the guy who came up with this. And then lots of physicists and astrophysicists like me have used this, but the people who actually study evolution and the planet were never involved, right? And if you went and talked to an evolutionary biologist or a biogeophysicist, they'd look at you when you explained this to them and they'd be like, what? Like, what are you guys doing? Turns out none of the details or none of the conceptual structure of this matches with what the people actually study the planet and its evolution.
Is it mostly about the fact that there's not really discrete big steps? It's a gradual, continual kind of process?
Well, there's two things. The first most important one was that the planet and the biosphere have evolved together. That's something that most biogeophysicists completely accept. And it was the first thing that Carter kind of rejected. He said, no, that's probably not possible. And yet, if he'd only sort of had more discussions with this other community, would have seen no, there are actually windows that open up. And then the next thing is this idea of whether a step is hard or not. Because for hard, what you mean by a hard step is that, like I said, every time there's a generation, every time there's the next generation born, you're rolling the dice on whether this mutation will happen. And the idea of something being a hard step, there's two ways in which something might even appear as a hard step and not be, or actually not be a hard step at all. One is that you see something that has occurred in evolution and it's only happened once, right? So let's take the opposite. You see something that's happened multiple times, like wings. Lots of examples of wings over lots of different evolutionary lineages. So that's clearly not a hard. Making wings is not a hard step. There are certain other things that people say, no, that's a hard step. Oxygen, the oxygen photosynthesis. But they tend to be so long ago that we've lost all the information. There could be other things in the fossil record that, made this innovation, but they're just gone now. So you can't tell. So there's information loss. The other thing is the idea of pulling up the ladder, that somebody, some species makes the innovation, but then it fills the niche and nobody else can do it again. So yeah, it only happened once, but it happened once because basically the creature was so successful, it took over and there was no space for anybody else to evolve it. So yeah, so the interesting thing about this was seeing how much, once you look at the details of life's history on Earth, how it really shifts you away from this hard steps model. And it shows you that those details, as we were talking about, like do you have to know about the planet? Do you have to know about plate tectonics? Yeah, you're going to have to.
I mean, to be fair to Carter on the first point, it makes it much more complicated if life and the planet are co-evolving. Because it would be nice to consider the planet as a static thing that sets the initial conditions.
Yeah.
And then we can sort of, from an outside perspective, analyze planets based on the initial conditions they create. And then there's a binary yes or no, will it create life? But if they co-evolve, it's just it's a really complex dynamical system where everything is becomes much more difficult from the perspective of SETI, of looking out there and trying to figure out which ones are actually producing life.
But I think we're at the point now. So now there may be other kinds of principles that actually, because coevolution actually has its own, not deterministic. You're done with determinism, right? Yep. But complex systems have patterns. Complex systems have constraints, and that's actually what we're going to be looking for, are constraints on them. And so, and again, nothing against Carter. It was a brilliant idea, but it just goes to show, there's this great XTC. I'm a theoretical physicist, right? So I love simplified. Give me a simplified model with, it's a dynamical equation, some initial conditions. I'm very happy. But there's this great XTC comic where, somebody's working something out on the board, and this physicist is looking over and saying, "Oh, I just wrote down an equation for that. I solved your problem. Do you guys even have a journal for this?" And the subtitle is "Why Everybody Hates Physicists."
Yeah.
So sometimes that approach totally works. Sometimes physicists, we can be very good at zooming in on what is important and casting the details aside so you can get to the heart of an issue. And that's very useful sometimes. Other times it obfuscates, right? Other times it clouds over actually what you needed to focus on, especially when it comes to complexity.